How could you grow stronger as a person to be worthy of a better stand or improve the one you already have? If stands take after their users' strengths, Jotaro's build and natural thinking speed make him an incredibly capable person even before he gets Star Platinum. So what if you're not Jotaro? What if you're not born with the same talents? Or what if you developed some kind of vulnerability later? Even if you win the lottery and some destiny puts you in a position to cause butterfly effects so you can impact others with your actions no matter how weak you are, you need strong character in order to use your stand to its full potential. But if you have some kind of condition, weakness, or setback that makes it harder for you to be as capable as the people in the highest bracket of stand users, you could push yourself and strain yourself and exhaust yourself just to match their default state, struggling and burning yourself out to stay on a level that's just a starting point for them. If you have obstacles other people don't have to deal with that make it harder to compete with or be on the natural level of others, what's a way you can still work around that disadvantage to hold your own and rival them? How would you become capable enough to match natural competence despite physical or mental privation? As an educational and battle strategy series, JoJo's has an idea of what it believes optimal strength looks like. So one thing it does is provide lessons and advice for what people can do to grow stronger in ways that work for various limitations and hardships. Of course, some people will have specific situations that need case-by-case solutions, but for many people, it could be helpful to look at the messages behind certain stands. Back in Stardust Crusaders, some of the main characters are strong from the start, but the idea behind the Fleshbud Crusaders is that they're examples of people with weaknesses that initially make them lose to someone on Dio's level, so thanks to Jotaro, they have an opportunity to find ways to overcome their weaknesses and grow stronger throughout their journey. Kakyoin being someone with cowardly traits, so he naturally hides, clings to things, closes himself off, keeps his distance, and hesitates in the open, learning to use his tendency to cling to people as a way to anchor himself against opposition by finding someone to protect, and Polnareff being impulsive, representing how someone who jumps at opportunities can be led astray or manipulated, which makes them easy for more capable people to work around. Given how stands work, JoJo's can introduce characters designed to convey specific messages and advice, because what matters is what you have influence with overall. Josuke and Polnareff both have self-control issues, but Destiny can say that Polnareff can have more influence and create more butterfly effects from the idea of impulse control. So Silver Chariot is a stand designed around just that idea, where the user's path forward for controlled strength is through precision and counteracting their impulses. As a naturally impulsive and easily distracted guy, Polnareff can act faster if he doesn't restrain himself, or he can regulate himself within a cautious and sustainable range to be able to continuously and safely attack. He gets a sword that he can launch but then has to pick back up to use again, that he's better off keeping in the hilt to be able to reliably attack with. Like how he can jump and launch himself at opportunities, but can be led far astray or end up vulnerable if he misses his mark. And he has armor that protects him from damage but slows him down, because if he follows his gut, he can act faster, on reflex, but he's leaving himself vulnerable and susceptible to counters if his blind impulses get him to make any bad moves. Fighting your impulses does counteract your instinct and brute strength, but even if it works against your natural might and aggression, the self-control lets you aim your strikes to be in so critically effective spots they make up for the loss in power, while you keep yourself safe from not putting yourself out there. So Silver Chariot deals precision damage rather than brute force, making it a stand with a sword, and a drawback where Polnareff can't use his stand's own eyesight when controlling it. But it still ends up being very powerful, and to confirm that it's the right choice over instinct, Polnareff's deliberate timing ends up being an asset in Part 5, when the enemy has the power to see and avoid fast and forceful actions in advance. Unlike Jotaro, Polnareff, even with psychic powers, starts out as a pretty weak kid, because Silver Chariot shows how someone with self-control problems can learn to become more capable through impulse control, with Polnareff as a character being someone who's reckless and emotional, but learns to commit to vows and fiercely train his stand. But that stand concept is a lesson about applying the strengths you have. What if you don't have those fundamental gifts in the first place, but weaknesses that would make it hard to ever reach the same level as top performers? Things that make it hard to improvise, to have the same mental fortitude or stamina, where you lack the stuff that would make you directly strong. Koichi is a character who specifically doesn't have Jotaro's talents. First, he has no height, no muscle, and no physical strength whatsoever. So how can someone like that still have influence, still ultimately have power? Fitting his role as a main character of Part 4, with its theme of the benefits of society, he can still have influence in a society thanks to the idea of communication. So he gets echoes, symbolizing strength from communication. But second, Koichi is short-sighted because he doesn't have Jotaro's mental capacity. So his solution to that is to learn to isolate specific mindsets and compartmentalize ways he can be effective. So his stand alternates between acts that isolate individual powers, ways he can use communication to stand up for himself, proactively do stuff himself, and then actually attack opponents by himself, ultimately making him somebody so capable that even Jotaro is able to rely on him. In JoJolion, we're given a new Koichi, who's now about how someone who even lacks the fundamental self-control and stability to normally be a stand user can still have a way to become reliable. Yasuho is an example of someone who gets too self-conscious, where if they try to deliberately comprehend or accomplish something, they stutter, freeze, and self-sabotage. She's someone who can't function properly as a person at all, because she's so stuck short-circuiting in her own head, she's learned to zone out and dissociate, and let her subconscious direct and anchor her behavior for her, which means consciously, she's separated from her ability to grasp or accomplish things, and any practical strength she would have would be very delicate because she's leaning on whatever form her subconscious takes, and from her point of view would appear very circumstantial. And it would mean she's grown up often feeling out of the loop, or that she needs to pry at things she doesn't understand until something clicks, as if a force beyond her, like a guardian entity or fate, solves her problem for her, in a way that could make her feel like she's maybe somehow magically lucky, despite also feeling like she has really low self-confidence or backbone, and that her life is chaotic and full of misfortune. So consciously, being separated from her inner strength and not knowing what to do when left to her own devices, while also not having the stability to hold her perspective together, she's learned to lean on available systems of information she can distract herself with by immersing herself in, like history and technology. Things she can always trace the rules and connections of and be led along, whether or not she reliably retains the bigger picture in her unstable head at every moment. And because these are systems that influence the wider world, the modern day is at the mercy of history and technology. The way she grounds herself by aligning her focus with them means she can lead herself to have stronger influence through them. So once she awakens a stand from how her distant subconscious can give her enough consistent influence through her skill with technology and tracing the connectivity of things, she can observe her stand consistently manifesting from the outside, which gives her opportunities to gradually practice and reinforce consistent ways she can harness its power with it as an external entity she interacts with, effectively making a filter that regulates how she harnesses her own influence so her self-conscious behavior and short-circuiting don't throw the stand out of whack. Paisley Park isn't able to become as seamlessly controllable or physically powerful as a regular stand. But it doesn't need to, because it can be flexible with how it can form and use its power to be just as reliable in a crisis. Because to be a capable person, you don't necessarily need to solve problems through a specific toolset or conscious approach, when instead, you can align yourself with general skill sets or roles, and have circumstance sort of automatically fill in what you need to do, so it gets done unconsciously. So if you're the type to get stuck in your own head and mess up all the time, Paisley Park is potentially a good model for a workaround for you. Now, I'm not a doctor, but the human brain is pretty complex and fundamentally functions like a computer. So you gotta wonder, how does your code avoid getting stuck in infinite loops? I'm not talking about focus or attention span, but how does your core mental process, if you zoom in really far, happen in sequence, where for each step you can recall part of a memory, experience part of a new thought, continue a line of thinking, experience part of a sensation, or process information. If Yasuho's problem is that nothing's preventing her sequence from short-circuiting, what if someone can have a problem where their sequence doesn't naturally advance to the next step? Tons of things can go wrong with the development of the human body, and the brain needs layers and layers of functionality to run smoothly. So maybe there's normally a cap on how much your brain will process or comprehend one sensation or idea at a time, limiting how much time you spend on each step so you smoothly advance to the next one, like a camera hanging at a sports game. It's constantly moving along wires to be able to keep up with the game, so even though it never fully captures or stays at one point of view for more than one frame at a time, it more than makes up for that because it can follow the relevant plays and effortlessly show you different angles. But if something gets spilled on one of the wires, any of them get stuck, or anything goes wrong with the mechanism that moves the camera along them, if there's any problem with this complex and delicate system, the camera can end up stuck in one place. And then, it'll just soak in the same point of view and have to focus on the game from there, letting people notice stuff from that angle more easily, but no longer having the capacity to keep up with things by moving, meaning it's useless when new developments in the game move the activity to another part of the field. And it always has blind spots because who knows what players are doing at angles it can't see. For a person with any friction making it harder or more exhausting for their mental sequence to advance, getting stuck on the wrong part of the process could keep them from moving on from a step of feeling something to a step where they can take away from it, letting the degree of the feeling build, and making it so the wrong sensations or emotions can become overwhelming. And when they deliberately try to do something, it would be like using a claw machine that you can't move left or right. It's a lot of extra energy to try to move the claw by shaking the machine from the outside, and still imprecise because you can't control it directly, so you're better clawing away at whatever ends up directly under where the claw happens to be stuck. Someone dealing with this might develop a tendency to stick to the same perspective or fascination, or miss a lot of the implications and lessons you'd normally unknowingly gain from experiencing various parts of life, meaning they'd fall more and more behind their peers as time passes, with their difference in comprehension potentially not even being clear on the surface. Because to avoid getting overwhelmed from their lack of ability or stamina to advance their mental sequence, which would make some processing oversaturated while preventing them from processing other details, they might learn to compensate by spreading their limited mental process thin, finding ways to act, understand, and deal with things that resemble the norm, but whether they realize it or not, their slower processor is finding the easiest ways to interpret things to find ways to catch up to their situation. They're unknowingly straining themselves in a desperate attempt to avoid getting left behind, but it means that rather than making stable conclusions and moving on for further processing, they're piling on superficial placeholder notes and using up more and more cache to add instructions to the step they're stuck at. Their inner mechanism is different, and if they try to take the same path as their peers because they don't realize it, they'll only wear themselves out, kinda like with Aaron's harness. But the biggest downside for being a stand user is that having a mental mechanism with friction misaligns it from other processes and messes up so many layers of functionality that need to run smoothly. It means, whether they'd realize it or not, they'd only be seeing or experiencing a fraction of what people'd think they would. So in a conflict against an opponent, where the core of their thinking would have to be flexible enough to truly improvise, because they'd be pitted against the mental capabilities of another person, they'd be overwhelmed and completely powerless. So despite all that, if you do have some friction that will trip you up in the back of your head somewhere, if you try to improvise or clash with someone who can, what can you do to respond to conflicts and outperform people who can properly adapt to things? Going back to part 4, Akira Otoishi seems to be meant to answer this question, because for as fast as Red Hot Chili Pepper is, that's only ever when it's making predetermined or pre-learned moves. It's slow to process new ideas in the moment, which leads to it getting caught off guard in actual battle. But Akira is designed to be someone who consciously analyzes whatever overwhelms him, so even if he can't match it on the fly, he can account for it the next time. He aggressively clings to the idea of being a performer for stability, strength, and something to process the world through, and even if he loses to Josuke's team, he's able to put up a pretty good fight. Because if you're up against someone whose personal stats are higher, like someone with more muscle or better reflexes, you don't have to engage them in a fistfight. Technology, resources, and numbers can overpower anyone's raw strengths. And if you're in an actual conflict, you can use whatever tools or tactics you need to. Red Hot Chili Pepper doesn't start out strong, and it relies on electricity. Akira's stats as a person are weak, and he depends on rigid supports, systems, and obsessions to anchor himself to. But like with Yasuho, humanity is at the mercy of wider systems like society and technology, which run on systems of their own. So being able to exploit the systems you're anchored to is its own type of strength. And if you're mapping out the logic behind things to compensate for how you don't naturally comprehend it or have reflexes for it, not only can you draw from what you've anchored to build and add to your own strength, you can take advantage of pretty much anything, any infrastructure, tool, or tactic to avoid having to confront opponents in ways where they have the advantage. Akira's mistake is that since he uses his dream to process the overwhelming wider world through, it doesn't occur to him to think in different ways, to consider other perspectives or roundabout paths that could pay off. He takes whatever he's made aware of and deals with it however is necessary to let him follow the most straightforward path possible, the only path he's able to see. So he recklessly loots a bunch of stuff he finds out about, and he makes a lot of enemies who end up overwhelming him because he's not applying himself in a good way. But the stand he's able to develop is incredibly strong, because even if he has this slower processor that would make traditional conflict unwinnable, he can specialize in certain skills, regulate the fights he gets into, and consciously break down every overwhelming detail he comes across in his off time, to be able to handle and match the level of traditionally capable stand users. The last stand I want to talk about, though, is about a more general workaround for your disadvantages. It's universally helpful, but you'd have to figure out how to apply its advice to your own situation. And it's Tusk. Originally given to Johnny because whether he's capable or not, he'll reliably fight with tooth and nail, but as he learns ways to get stronger, the stand grows with him. Just in a way that's conditional, because his added strengths are learned skills, not built into him, and he doesn't have the opportunity to prep them all the time. His story is about how he can make up for the disadvantages caused by losing his ability to walk, which involves him relying on his skill with a horse, a workaround in the meantime, and then becoming a capable enough stand user overall that it doesn't matter whether he can physically walk or not, so his legs can afford to just start working again. Until he gets to that point, his paralysis is a disadvantage, and he may only be able to afford to realize important things to make up for it throughout his journey because he's given lots of lucky opportunities for introspection, but his conclusions can be universal, that your actions are relative. They take place in an environment, and you make up part of that whole and take up some of that space, just like anything else in there. Your motions change the space other things have to work with, and can be used to purposefully guide their behavior. So even if you can't accomplish something with your own body directly, your connectedness, the chain reactions tying you to the wider environment, means you have everything in there to work with. And it gives you an edge over most people who lose sight of that, or most conflicts that arise from people losing sight of that. And that the world can be endlessly complex with some details you can never hope to make sense of. But even in that noise, where you don't fundamentally know the rules of cause and effect, you can spot patterns. So if you learn to break down your environment into observable patterns, knowing how those patterns interact with each other, and how your actions can trigger them, then in most cases, without needing to be sure of how they work on the inside, you can use an external pattern against other external patterns to influence them. Because even if other characters have only ever done it instinctively, JoJo's has always put emphasis on memorizing the patterns, or symbols, you can comprehend the world through to use to succeed. So even against unknowns, like the Leviathan, you can use your patterns, your angle, to have a good chance of being victorious. JoJo's advice is super general, or open to interpretation, so who's to say it will help at all? But if taken to heart, maybe it can help you become more capable in your own life, and reach a point where, if you were hit by the stand arrow, you'd get something pretty incredible.